Well, people, one of the reasons I host this show is because I don't believe that we can have justice or freedom or democracy without true journalism. Clearly, the forces of corporatism agree with me, and that's why they've been systematically dismantling the fourth estate since before I was born. But where are we now with this? Joining us to talk about the attack on press freedom is award-winning veteran investigative reporter Brian Karem. I'm sure you already know him. Remember early in the Trump administration, there was that journalist who had his press credentials revoked for asking an actual question and thereby revealing Trump's authoritarian views on how the press should function. Well, that was him. Our guest is also the same journalist who asked Trump if he would commit to a peaceful transition of power. Let's recall that moment. Roll the video, Giancarlo.
Right here, Mr. President, real quickly, win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? And there has been rioting in Louisville, there's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
The second question is,
absolutely chilling. I think that's enough of that.
You asked the question.
Absolutely chilling. Well, we all know how that turned out. Brian Karem joining us today. He has a new book out, Free the Press, The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. It reveals how journalism and the free speech it relies on became so endangered, and what is our great hope for resuscitating it? That's coming up next in our interview section. Stay tuned. Brian Karem joins us today. Brian, thank you so much for being on the program with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, it's really an honor to have you here after you did the nation an enormous public service by doing what actual journalists do, holding the feet of our elected officials to the fire. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. That's kind of the job.
Right. Has there been fallout from that, either positive or negative for you?
You mean after September 23rd? Well, after the insurrection, that was the last day I think I got death threats. So it's been a year now with President Biden. So it's been kind of nice not having to go to work with death threats. But there are those who there are those on Capitol Hill who still won't talk to me because, of course, they're part of the Trumplican party and are convinced that the best way to ensure democracy is by destroying it. So we don't have much to say in that regard, but otherwise it's all good. It's part and parcel, par for the course.
You've been talking about, in your book, you talk about the decimation of the press, and you detail the bipartisan nature of the takedown. Can you give us a little walk through recent presidential history so everyone knows it's not just a one-sided issue?
Yeah, sure. We can start with Nixon. that's where Nixon and Roger Ailes they began it. It was Ronald Reagan who codified it and actually put it into place because Nixon was bounced out of office before he could do what he wanted, and he wanted a very favorable. He wanted a media that was subservient to him. Nixon couldn't do it, but Reagan, he got rid of the fairness doctrine. He allowed news media empires to buy themselves up, thereby destroying the independence of the press, and it led to where we are now. Now, after that...
Briefly, just the fairness doctrine is when equal time needed to be devoted from candidates of different parties.
More than that, the fairness doctrine gave birth to television news. It was because they had to donate time to, public affairs programming and to give both sides of an issue that gave us, television news. And getting rid of it created silos of media coverage. Today, people go to where they want to find the news that agrees with what they already agree with.
Mhm.
So we end up with news today that's not news. It's not what we need to see, read, or hear. It's what we want to see, read, or hear. And many times it influences and stratifies and codifies our own ignorance instead of enlightening people. So both sides have done it. The Clinton administration, of course, with the Telecommunication Act 1996, he didn't write it, but he signed it. And
What did that do to
well,
our,
what it
our
actually,
atmosphere?
what that did more than anything else, if you go to a radio station anywhere in the country, it's probably owned by iHeartRadio.
Right.
And that's one of the big things that happened with the Telecommunication Act and Sinclair Television and Media. There used to be limits on the number of properties you could own, particularly in one market, because we didn't want monopolies, because we saw monopolies as bad. Now they're considered de rigueur, and they are part and parcel of what we see and read and hear and watch every day. And that gave it. And then, of course, you can go to George W. Bush and the Patriot Act, which helped government spy on reporters. Then you can go to the Obama administration, which used the Espionage Act 8 times to go after whistleblowers. So, and then, of course, you have Trump, who was he just sat at the table that was set by all the other presidents, and then proceeded to defecate all over it and tear it asunder.
Mm.
And then and Biden has even had his problems. Biden, the Jamal Khashoggi on the campaign trail, he promised to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for killing. And this is a journalist who lived in the United States, worked for a United States publication, and was killed abroad in Turkey. And all the evidence points to someone inside the Saudi empire as the crown prince, who is behind it. And Biden promised to punish this guy and punish Saudi Arabia, and hasn't done it. So every president has been a problem. Every president has guided us down this path to where we no longer have free speech in this country.
In the end of your book, you talk about the things that we can do, obviously turning back the clock on some of these things that you just mentioned. But why would any president do them? I mean, you'd really need a president who is committed to democracy and not their own party. And I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, yeah. But if you appeal to their own self-interest, it's also in their best interest. Getting them to understand that is difficult because they don't see anything other than control as benefiting their self-interest. But the real truth of the matter is that a free and impartial press enables us to hold everyone accountable, which is why one of the things I recommend in the book is, and it had bipartisan support, was a shield law. So reporters a national shield law, which would enable reporters to keep confidential sources and not have to go to jail if they didn't want to disclose those sources, right? So the last time that was introduced, it was Jim Jordan and Jamie Raskin who co-sponsored that bill. Now, you can't find two different people on the political spectrum than those two. And Mike Pence had introduced one. They realized that free speech and the ability to investigate benefits everyone. And well, actually, they saw it as benefiting them going against their opponents, but that meshed in the fact that everybody saw that it would assist free speech. But we don't have that type of cooperation available to us today. So it's very, very difficult to get anyone to look at the problems that are in the press. Everyone gripes about the press. Some say we lean left, some say we lean right. And after 40 years in this business, I can tell you what we don't understand, what people not in this business, what we don't understand if we're not in this business is that we're not tilted to the left or the right. We're tilted toward money. Right. Whatever makes us a profit is. So if the American public wanted better and turned us off, we'd have to give better in order to sell. And we don't do that. There's no incentive.
What would a financial incentive be? I mean, you don't want state-run media. We already have that at Fox. But I mean, what? And then there's independent public media like NPR, but they are taking huge amounts of money from different corporations. So where are we going for information that's still journalistically integrous, but not corporate control?
You have to divorce journalism. It cannot be intertwined with capitalism. I'm a great capitalist. Go out and buy as many copies of my book as you want. I'll be happy to sell them to you. But that's not the way journalism works. And so you have to have, there's a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, the government has always, the real problem is a lack of, it's community journalism. That's the backbone of journalism. That's where it all begins. And, the daily neighborhood newspaper doesn't exist anymore. And some people say, well, it can't exist in today's age. Yeah, it could if it gave decent information. We just don't have them around. So one of the problems there is local, state, and federal governments have cut back on public notice ads, which underwrites a lot of that. And these ads serve two purposes. They're a revenue stream for small newspapers, but they also provide what we really need out of government more than anything else, and that's transparency. When do you go? When's the county commissioner meeting? What's going on in your high school sports team? What's going on with an estate sale? All those legal notices those legal notice ads that were in newspapers were also help build a community. You'd have salesmen, you'd have, the lawyers, you'd have car salesmen look and say, oh, look who got a raise. Oh, look who moved here. Oh, what estate went on sale. Oh, what merger happened here? And you could find, and it helped build a community. You and I may disagree at the national level about politics, but I guarantee you everybody living in your neighborhood wants a paved road and a cleaned, and a street light that works.
Exactly.
And clean water and air. And so those things that build communities, if we start there by breaking up media monopolies, which is the big thing, and then supporting community journalism, those two things alone would drive great lengths to great lengths to solving the problem. And you provide, low interest loans. You provide, what if, for example, on your income tax, you got $100 rebate if you could prove that you subscribe to a daily newspaper? That alone would help subsidize real news. And you don't have that anymore at all.
Brian, it seems like these forces, I really, what you're saying right now is making me think about how it is very hard to know what's going on in your local town, and that national news can be so polarizing. And now we're very polarized against each other, even though we share a lot of similar interests, as you made mention of the roads, bridges, etc. It seems like it's by design. I hate to be that way, but it's by design. Yes, they want us to be polarized.
It's designed by the government for control, and the same thing by big business. Because look, the government benefits when they control the message, and it's all propaganda. And Edward R. Murrow warned us of this in 1958 at the Radio Television News Directors Association meeting in that year, and this is in the book. He was the keynote speaker, and he said, listen, if we don't clean up our act, pretty soon all we're going to do is listen to slogans and propaganda. And here we are. And that's a huge problem. And you've got it now on the business side of it. The smaller number of businesses create greater profit, but they never reinvest in the product. So what you get in journalism today, it's like buying a brand new Cadillac without an engine. It doesn't really go anywhere. It looks pretty. I mean, you turn on CNN, and I've been on these talk shows, these panel shows. Boy, it looks like we're discussing the issues, but we're not. It's 5 minutes of arguing back and forth with an anchor who doesn't know what they're talking about usually. And at the end, we're back at the same place we were when we started, which is, not really presenting you news. It's infotainment. When I first got into this business, 80% of what you see, read, or hear was run by 24 companies. Today, more than 90% of what you see, read, and hear is run by about 6 companies. There's twice the number of people on this planet as on the day that I was born, and half the number of reporters. There's your problem.
I have a lot of questions for you following up on that, on that issue. What are your thoughts about what's happened in terms of online media? We've got, we don't have to name names, or we can, but we've got a lot of these online people who have gained audiences because people do not believe, they don't find the mainstream media, the corporate media, to be a trusted source anymore. They're looking for kind of a gatekeeper that they can trust. And then that gatekeeper does not have necessarily journalism in their background and understand what they're doing in terms of journalism.
Well, that's not necessarily just the online people. There are plenty of people in mainstream media who have no idea what they're doing either.
Yes, probably true. Yes,
you're not going to get rid of online media, and I don't think you should, because it's a great democratization.
No, I don't think so either.
Of what we do, but there are certain guidelines, and I put these in the book, certain things that we could adhere to. First of all, you're not a journalist unless you at least have a copy editor. You're a blogger, you're an opinion writer, fine, label it as such. But if you're going to actually report facts, you need to be there to witness them, which is what journalism has fundamentally been forever. A witness, if you're the first person to see it, you're there, okay? The young woman who got the Pulitzer Prize, a special Pulitzer Prize for recording a gentleman having his neck stepped on and killed by police. We all know that video. That was an act of journalism. She wasn't a journalist, but it was an act of journalism, recording and then disseminating the information with no editorial content. That's the purest form of journalism. If we adhere to those standards online, and I put some of those out there in this book, how you can do that, then fine. It's the fact that we can't understand, we don't know for sure when we see something online, is it real? Is it imagined? Is it deep fake? What is it? Which is why you also need to support newspapers. Look, I can hack anything online, right? I can change it. It's ethereal, it's ephemeral, it can change. But that newspaper that I have in my collection, printed in 1815, remains the same today as it was on the day it was printed. It's finite, it's accountable, and in many ways superior to what you see online today. There is a place in our consumption of news for both, and we need to support both.
That's interesting. You've made me feel good about myself, because that's what we do at ACT-TV is we go to events, live street events, we go to protests, et cetera, and we bring the coverage, we live stream the coverage.
Right.
We were, part of that movement of independent media, of
media
who just went on the street with live streaming technology has allowed people to do acts of journalism, as you call them.
Well, and I have reporters. I mentored a lot of young journalists and ran 2 community newspapers for a dozen years. And the big thing I always tell young reporters, and this is how I separate a reporter from an opinion writer, is I would have reporters come to me and go, "Oh, this is what I think." And I go, "I don't care what you think. I barely care what I think. What do you know?" Well, let's go out and vet the facts. If you can present vetted facts and you have a copy editor going through those vetted facts, someone who's not you, who can go through the tape or your copy or your stand-up or the 12-inch column that you've written and go, "All right, what do you mean here? What's the fact there? Where'd you get that quote?" And holding people accountable, that's journalism. And we need far more of it. But there are a lot of people that just get online and pretend that they're journalists without ever understanding what it is that journalism really is. And that takes a bit, doesn't take a college degree. It takes a curious mind, and it takes diligence. And those two things, journalism has always attracted those type of people, but keeping them is hard because we don't make any money.
Bringing me right to my next question. In your book, you talked about the role hedge funds are playing in the decimation of the free press. Talk a little bit about that here.
Well, hedge funds have destroyed newspapers. I mean, I call them vulture capitalists, and those venture capitalists that go out and buy up hundreds of newspapers. What they do is they're accountable to the bottom line. So, those people sitting in a board, in the boardroom going, "All right, how do we increase profits this week? Well, let's get rid of, there are newspapers today, by the way, mainstream newspapers that don't have copy editors because they were deemed too expensive, which is why, people complain that there's a problem with the news, and there is. And that's because we don't have anybody doing what you need to do to call it news. I mean, if you want to retain credibility, the first thing I was taught when I was a young lad was that you spell the names right. How can I believe anything else that you're printing about me if you don't get my name right? And there's a lot of that. So that's, the copy editing, the hedge fund investors, every newspaper I've ever worked at has closed or been bought out over the last 40 years. And that's frightening and sad. And in many ways tells you about the death of American journalism. I mean, I got in right at the zenith and have followed it through its nadir. And it's frustrating on many levels. And those venture capitalists have destroyed those, like the Alden Group and others that have bought out newspapers and closed them down. We were always told, like when I first got into newspapers, "Hey, we've got computers in the newsroom now, so we're going to save money on typesetting." Great. So we can hire more reporters? No. That means the people who own the newspaper are making more money. Aren't you happy? Do I get a raise? No. But don't you feel happy that there's fewer of you here?
How about cooperatives? reporting cooperatives where the money has to go either back to the workers or back to the people.
Yeah, unions have always been good about that, and they don't want to unionize reporters. They're scared to death of that. But
are they?
Yeah, owners don't want unions.
Well, yeah. I thought you meant the unions don't want the reporters.
No, union. Any union member wants to see more unions. And look, Ronald Reagan started that. He busted up PAPCO. I mean, every unions, and they've been sold because of this trickle down economics. They've been sold as something anathema to democracy when in fact they're the epitome of it. Small fiefdoms owned by rich white guys who own everything is not how you demonstrate democracy. That's feudalism. I mean, they scream about socialism. I'm more worried about feudalism.
So you were once jailed for protecting your source. I'm wondering if you can comment on the jailing and treatment of Julian Assange. I know it's kind of an out there question. You didn't touch on it in your book, but
yeah.
Hey, why not?
Well, I think the jailing of anyone doing an act of journalism is anathema to the democratic process. And I did not cover Julian Assange that much, but I understand the very concept of what he went through was journalism, and releasing that information was an act of journalism. Now, you can paint him any way you want, but that's a fact. And so, yes, I would, it's like every time a few years back, there are about a dozen of us in this country that have gone to jail to protect a confidential source. And at the National Press Club here in DC about 5 years ago, I got together most of us that were alive that have done it. I called ourselves the first Jailbirds Club. And we got together before our meeting and our TED Talk type of thing. And we got together in this room and we all started talking. And we found out that all of us had pretty much the same experience. Those who arrested us, those who put us in jail, all claimed that they supported the First Amendment, that they were big supporters of the First Amendment, but not in our particular case, because what we did was wrong. Mm. And so it's always about them bending the rules instead of allowing journalism to exist. They say, oh, yeah, we support it, except when it really hurts. Then we don't support it. Well, then you're not supporting it. And that was an eye-opener to me. So those who go after anyone, doing an act of journalism, to me, that's antithetical to the First Amendment.
We've already talked about some of the ways to revive journalism. First of all, the second part of your book title is how to revive it. Did they make you put and how to revive it in your book so
no,
it doesn't scare and depress everyone?
No, I wanted that because everyone says it's dead and that the golden age of journalism has passed. Well, I've never known a golden age of journalism, so God bless.
I was wondering, what was it like before Nixon? I wasn't here, so I mean, was it like
golden age? I'm telling you,
there was always some problem, right?
Yeah, but what I did see was a way to show people how it could be done correctly and why people on the left and people on the right and people in the middle get it wrong and what they get right about the problems. There are deep-seated, horrible problems in journalism, but it has absolutely nothing to do with what people think it has something to do with. And so I wanted to show people how you could fix it.
Oh, excuse me. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program today. The book is Free the Press, The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. And again, I want to thank you for holding President Trump's feet to the fire. You said it was all in the name of a day's work, or that it's your job, but it is difficult to do your job sometimes when, the march of tyranny is right in front of you. So thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate you putting yourself on the line that way.
Thank you for having me on the show anytime. It was enjoyable.
Great. Thank you. I will be calling you back because you were fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
You're watching Act TV. We'll be right back.